Hello and welcome to WonderCon Virtual Styles. This is our Oni Press panel for WonderCon 2021 called Diversity is Not the Story. And it is about how representation is not the end all be all of this. And we're gonna get into some more complex, nuanced thoughts and opinions on how diversity is being commodified in our industry, how we feel about it as creators, and where we want to see the industry go from here. And so I'm curious to y'all, when it comes to inclusion and storytelling in comics and graphic novels, what does diversity even mean within the publishing industry? You know, it's gotten pretty vague. And, you know, how is this concept presented to readers and general audiences? How does diversity intersect with individual identity and the stories that we want to tell and how we tell them, and also how publishers want us to tell them, and how the world perceives those stories when they're out. So we brought together three incredible speakers, creators who are me as the moderator. Hello, I'm Amanda. I'm an editor at Oni Press. And our creators today are Rodney Barnes. He is an award-winning writer-producer. He's worked on Wu-Tang, American Saga, Marvel's Runaways, American Gods, and he is a writer for one of our absolute favorite monthly comics, Quincredible, out by Lion Forge. We also have Stanley, an incredible and hilarious cartoonist who makes comics that are creepy, funny, but always queer. Ever since high school, she's been making comics and plenty of webcomics, including The Hazards of Love, which Oni Press is collecting this year, and I'm very excited about it. And it's heavily influenced by a lot of Mexican culture and ephemera in which Stan grew up. We also have Nadia Shamas. She is an Arab American writer and native Brooklynite, and she is the co-writer of Squire, coming out from HarperCollins next fall, this fall actually. Oh my God, it is 2021. We have to remember that.
I have to say it did get pushed to 2022.
Oh no, that is not common at all in this pandemic.
I was gonna say, in these unprecedented times.
Oh Lord. Isn't it fun to be the president? We did not want to be the president. So yes, with Sarah Alfaghi, Squire is coming out in 2022. And she's also the creator and curator of Corpus, which is an anthology of bodily ailments. So I'm curious to all three of you, what your idea of diversity means to you. What does it mean to you when an editor talks to you about diversity? What does it mean when you see an article about diversity in publishing? What does it mean when you're asked to be a panelist on a panel about diversity? So yeah, feel free to be as messy and honest as you want here. I'll start with you, Rodney. How do you feel?
I was hoping I didn't have to go first.
You are the most experienced in this.
Yeah, but you know, yes, this is true. And I think the word diversity has sort of evolved throughout the course of my career. Certainly it meant, in the beginning, it meant don't just make it all white people.
Right.
And then it sort of evolved over time. To me, what I always hoped that it would be to where you don't just have people from different ethnic groups just to kind of place them in there to make kind of like this potpourri of faces and looks. I always hoped that it would speak to culture.
Yes.
And how people lived and authenticity. And in order to do that, you have to have those people represented in the writing and producing of a thing so that you get the specificity and nuance that I think is necessary to honor the idea of who people are. And, you know, I can only say I'm sure I'm the oldest person here today. I've grown up with this frustration of, I've seen, speaking specifically to African American culture, I've seen Black people in things all my life, and very rarely, I think, until the last decade, did I see a consistency and authenticity with how folks were presented. And it's an exciting time for me because, even this panel, you get people from different points of view entering into a conversation where typically you wouldn't get that if this were, days gone by. So, diversity still, I don't know if there's any one definition that sort of encompasses everything. But to me, hopefully it speaks to authenticity in storytelling from more than one perspective.
That's beautiful, Rodney. I agree. It does come down to culture, how, get it how you live, right? And like, there are a lot of white as default in media. And I can imagine a lot of the evolution we're seeing in more authenticity in representation and stories that center POC is probably that more POC are actually writing their own stories and actually getting them published. And gatekeepers are actually, even if begrudgingly, even if to fill a quota, even if it's cynical, the chance is still there for some to actually tell the story how they want to. Yeah, it's a great point. How about you, Stan?
So I think since we are giving ourselves permission to be messy here,
Yes, please.
not that I'm kind of a messy individual, regardless. I think my thing about diversity is I always get irritated when people think it's like a thing you're adding, right? When I'm not. It exists. I'm just reflecting it. Maybe I'm holding a mirror up to my world, maybe, but it's not something that is, at least on the part of myself and creators I know, it's not a thing we're like checking off a list, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's telling when usually white gatekeepers sort of see it that way, right? Because the only way you can see it that way is if you are still presupposing white as default. And then it's like, oh, and then I have to do this. And it just, it betrays the lack of concern that some folks have to real lived experiences that they are not aware of. The lack of information, the lack of imagination really stunts.
The lack of imagination, yeah. That's a big one for me because and we've talked about this, the one that always gets me is when someone just pops up very concerned to be like, well, what's next? Are you going to have are you going to have a Latinx man who converted to Islam and is struggling with mental illness or whatever? And it's like, this person exists. That's my friend Chris. He's nice. He loves werewolf. He loves werewolf so much. And that's the thing. They don't think, they'll just like throw out a combination, but they don't think that person is a real person with, feelings and thoughts and an existence. They're still just seeing it as a person off a checklist. And
yeah,
so
exactly. It's like they break up people's identity for parts and go like, what will be useful to me, instead of treating a person's experience as a whole, as it wants to be, instead of trying to go, well, I understand this part, so let's only make it about this part, which I have seen happen at institutions as well. How about you, Nadia? What do you think of? What does diversity mean to you in practice?
I think it's part of what makes it so difficult is that, it's diversity is kind of inextricable from you as a person. If you are not the default, then you are diverse. And I guess that means something different to everyone who falls in that category. It's kind of absurd. I think that there's, like Stan was saying, is that you don't go into telling stories thinking like, oh, how do I push my culture, my identity into it? It's just that is you. So you're going to do that. I mean, I certainly think that there's a large part of me that feels extra compelled to put, you know, Arab culture, Arab characters at the forefront of my stories, because, you know, what do I have? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Growing up, it's just like people speaking fake Arabic being terrorists on a plane. So like, I might as well do it, you know, I might as well do something different. And there's so many other people who are also creators who want to do the same thing. So yeah, I think that I'm trying to tell stories about the way my culture and my experience, you know, I guess I'm not even trying to tell stories about the way my culture, my experience. That's a lie. I am trying to tell the stories that I want to tell, and
Right.
it's part of it. You know, my type 1 diabetes affects the way I view the world. My growing up in an Arab household views the way that I view my world. So if I'm going to reflect my interior life, it's going to come out like that. And I think that the biggest misconception that frustrates me is the idea that these diverse stories need to be accessible for white readers. You know, I think like I am not doing it for you. I'm not doing it for your education. I'm doing it for me, because these are the kind of stories that I want to tell. And I think that, you know, I know later we're going to talk about publishing, but I think that that is kind of my biggest frustration in the diversity conversation, is that, you know, I am not attempting to sell you my culture. I am attempting to sell you my vision.
Yes, it's a huge difference. And that is a real problem when folks cannot separate the person from their story. That's another example of, you know, racism and sexism in any media industry, when you are not allowing the person to be their own person, and instead you are trying to turn them into an avatar that represents all of these disparate experience ideas.
Yeah.
And that's what the white gaze kind of does. It only knows how to compartmentalize and break things up into parts. And that's not how we live our lives.
It is. I think it's very frustrating and very damaging to creators, because it makes you self-edit. It makes you go, okay, if I want to sell this story, then I have to make it more in line of like what is okay with diversity. Like I have to pull back on surrealism or whatever. But no, that shouldn't be the case, you know?
Yeah, I call it the Karen in your head. You know, like
that's a good way of putting it.
Abolitionist Mariam
Horrible,
Kaba calls it the cop in your head and your heart, which is a problem that we all have, of course. But but the Karen in your head to me is whenever you're writing something and you're like, oh, Karen is going to ask what that means. Do I need to account for that in my storytelling? And, you know, just being able to call it when you see it, you know, and that in itself is hard, because white supremacy has seeped into everything. And it's hard when folks in publishing or any gatekeepers in media don't see the difference, because like you said, ultimately it's damaging. And it tends to turn into a weird sort of muddled product sometimes, especially in the case of movies. Yeah, great points, everyone. So I'm kind of curious now, sort of bringing in each of your respective backgrounds, how do your individual experiences intersect with the stories you wish to tell? Because it's wild to assume that they are, but this is a problem as well, where people sort of think when a woman tells a story, when a Black person tells a story, when a Latinx person tells their story, it's like, oh, this must have happened to you. You don't have the ability to like tell a story from thin air. This must just be your actual life. And it's like, we've got here the cover of one of our volumes of Quincredible, and it's like, clearly not. This is like a super paranormal superhero story. So yeah, I'm curious what each of you think about how your experiences intersect with your stories and how they diverge.
Well, I guess for me, in regards to Quincredible, Now, I grew up loving the Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew mysteries as a kid, and even Scooby Doo, for lack of a better reference. And I never really saw myself in them. I never even gave it a second thought, which is actually sadder, as to why I wasn't there. I grew up in a slave port, a town that was originally a slave port, and there was a certain math to it that sort of, even though it didn't say it out loud, I took on the idea that certain things just weren't for me, that I wouldn't see, and it was almost normalized in a weird kind of way. And after I grew out of that idea and I grew up and this opportunity afforded itself to be able to tell my own stories, I didn't want the generation of kids, certainly in my area, but anywhere, to feel the way that I felt growing up. So having the opportunity to write Quincredible was really more about telling an authentic story that sort of was just about the adventure without ignoring the stuff that's happening in the world around him. It wasn't the main thrust of the story. It certainly wasn't my story growing up, but just intrinsically, I wanted to take that sense of wonder that I never saw personally for me and infuse it into a character that looked like me and came from a world that I knew.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. And in your can you say which slave port you were near?
Oh, in Annapolis, Maryland, where ironically I was
Oh.
watching Roots before we got on, because it's the end of Black History Month.
Yes.
And Kunta Kinte landed in Annapolis, Maryland. That was a big deal when I was a kid.
Wow. Yes.
Annapolis was on TV. Not that it was a slave port, but just we saw the words. But it's known mostly for the Naval Academy, but it also was a slave port. And so like I said, the DNA and the math of that period of time was very much a part of just sociologically how my community worked in a weird kind of way, that we weren't really part of we facilitated the structure. We weren't really part of the structure itself. And I knew that as a kid. And to compound that even more so outside of myself, I very rarely saw films or books or comic books or anything that spoke to any idea of authenticity to what my life was like. It was more of non-existent. So
yeah. I mean, that's a really relatable experience for a lot of kids of color, growing up and knowing that they are clearly being pushed out into the margins. They know that they're not there. There's a feeling of like, you helped build the trampoline, but you don't get to jump on it, and you don't really know how to articulate that for a really long time. And yeah, I think Quincredible just does an excellent job of showing Quinn's interiority and how he navigates his world, and within these extremely unreal circumstances that definitely kind of embody
his family.
Yeah.
His relationship with it certainly wasn't my relationship to my family. So, just the healthy conversations, the healthy nature of the empathetic nature of the math of his family was something that I'd rarely seen in stories that had people who looked like me in them. Usually it was problematic. The father wasn't there. The mother was struggling with something. If it wasn't substance abuse or something, there was she had to work 11 jobs, or it was something that had to do with the pathology of racism. Someplace infused in the story to make it feel, in quotes, familiar. And oftentimes it was connected to the Blaxploitation movement, I think, of storytelling that somehow found its way into comics in a way. I mean, early Black Panther, early Luke Cage had a lot of that stuff in it. Not so much today, because you have different, creators behind those books. But I just wanted the opportunity, if I was going to deal in the YA universe, to sort of to tell a story that just felt like it wasn't that.
Yeah, exactly. It's so it's healing in a lot of ways, because so many families are like this, but they don't get to see themselves. You know, instead, you know, you're showing folks the worst case scenario as imagined by some white guy or something, you know, and it's just, it's not the same. It's one of the many reasons why I also love the show Craig of the Creek. It just shows a real family that loves each other and what support looks like at home, because some of us are getting it, and those who aren't deserve to see what that looks like.
Well, I think you spoke earlier to gatekeepers,
Yeah.
and just really quickly, I can't tell you how many times someone who didn't come from my culture explained to me the type of story that I should be telling about my culture. And typically it went with their understanding of what the culture was. And if it was about history, it was either the civil rights movement, slavery, or Jim Crow. It was someplace in, you know, that fit right in there in a comfortable way. And I was very rarely allowed to work outside of that.
Yeah, that's a real problem. And yeah, people
Yeah.
are still getting stuck in those boxes. And you know, it's tough because it's like the bag is on the line. You know, and if you're a new creator and you're trying to impart some nuance and you've got a story that people haven't really seen before, can you trust the gatekeeper to recognize that? And
Yeah.
in a lot of cases, the answer is, what were you going to say, Nadia?
I was going to say, I feel what Rodney is saying very strongly, especially because, you know, I'm Palestinian specifically. And that is a not particularly loved group of Arabs who are not particularly loved in America generally as a
Girl.
group. I don't know
Yeah.
how, I'm like trying to say this kindly. I don't know how, but it's like
It's really hard. I mean,
it's hard to talk about, you know, how absolutely awful it can be to grow up Palestinian in America, especially the fact that my formative years were during the post 9/11 Bush era.
Yes.
And I grew up in New York. So, you know, I lived in an Arab neighborhood. It was you know, it was brutal. But the point is that when I was pitching Squire, and the thing is that I've always been a fan of fantasy and historical fantasy and high fantasy, and I've loved it my whole life, even though it's just so racist.
Yep.
You know, and I didn't really think I could do anything about it. I just kind of loved it. And growing up in the time and the conditions that I grew up, I so desperately tried to fit in to kind of white culture, and I never understood why I couldn't quite break through.
Mhm.
And so now a lot of my work is I am me attempting to be just absolutely unrepentantly proud and in love with where I'm from. But when I was pitching Squire, when Sarah and I were pitching Squire, and I have to commend my co-creator Sarah for being so, you know, strong and, you know, like unrelenting in the vision of that book. But we got a few publishers who kept asking, um, uh, is this about Palestine, Israel? Like, and if it is, then we need to loon back, just because it was about a fantasy with a colonial culture. And I knew that there's nothing in that book that indicates the conflict at all. The only reason they're asking me is because I am Palestinian, and they are afraid to hire me on like a public, you know, facing level,
And
because
they're
even my
inferring you have an
very
agenda. That's the
yeah,
worst part of it.
yeah, I had to go on phone calls and assure people that I am not trying to hide a hidden agenda in Squire, which would never happen, you know, if there was a white person writing that book. And because it is a book about, it is a fantasy book that I would say the emotional core of certainly comes from growing up in kind of the Bush era,
Yeah.
and realizing what it means when you're part of an empire that is also at war with where you are from.
Yes.
And I think that, you know, it's absurd that I had to go through that. It made me want to quit. It made me not want to write the book. But, you know, Sarah was very supportive during those questioning moments. And so, you know, I'm very proud of what we did. And all I was trying to do was to make a project that was a fantasy but celebrated the heritage more so than was just kind of racist about it. But yeah, I
Right.
guess what I was trying to say is that when Rodney was talking about gatekeepers telling you about like your own culture, that was certainly a moment where it was my first time pitching a book. It was my first time writing a book, and that was the first thing I came across.
It's so intimidating.
It is truly, and it makes you think to yourself, like, what do I do? Luckily the book ended up in very supportive hands, but it makes you feel suspicious just to try to be. The fact that I did not have a say in whether or not my identity was politicized when I'm just trying to tell a book that has nothing to do with it. It's a fantasy book. They're made up worlds. They just reflect, a different culture. Nobody asks when Game of Thrones if there's like someone named Catelyn or Ned or Brandon or whatever. Like no one's like, oh, what's the political message? Like,
Right.
what are
Is
you
this about
trying to
your
say?
own childhood trauma?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. So it's like, I think that the emotional core of all my stories come from me, but I am trying to tell genre stories that were antagonistic to people of color in a way that speaks to, I mean, I can only speak for my experience. So, but yeah, no, gatekeepers in publishing, they can be rough. It can be very hard to explain yourself.
That's an
Yeah.
impossible situation to be in. And all I can imagine while you were describing those conversations is if you were alone. You had safety in numbers with having two creators who knew, who can see eye to eye and know exactly what they're trying to do. And that connection between you two, the relationship and being able to believe in your work helps you through that. And I imagine when a new creator is going into a room for the first time for, a first ever potential book sale, and they go through that conversation, how are they not going to be beaten down?
And I do want to say that a majority of publishers were very kind. And they didn't treat me like that at all. And my agent was behind me and Sarah was behind me, but I will still never forget that was my first experience pitching, was that like, this is what I was faced against.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Stan, what do you think?
I think that's a hell of a thing for Nadia to have gone through, and I'm sorry you did.
I imagine I am not alone.
That's the thing. That's the thing.
Yeah.
For every, you've told that's your story. There are dozens of people out there. I'm also right. Kind of horror is my genre, but I intersperse it with fantasy and whatever the hell I want, basically, because I can and I will. And that's kind of to go off something Nadia was saying about the pressure to fit in. It makes me think about with creating this story and with even being on panels like this, I like flash back to my childhood, and my parents are immigrants. Depends on how you define the term. I am either zero generation or first generation. I always compare my childhood in Mexico and later going to school in the US as kind of like the border that exists between Jersey and New York. It's more of a distance than a mental thing in the part where I grew up. But my mother was very adamant that I had to be perfect, not just for myself, but because if I wasn't a model student, I wasn't just going to be judged. My family would be judged. My entire culture would be judged. Everyone would be judged based off one mistake. And this is a hell of a thing for a 10-year-old to carry,
Yeah.
So many of us, I feel, have parents that have gone through such terrible treatment, have families that have gone through such terrible treatment at these hands for being different, that we get kind of this anxiety put on us that we have to be perfect or everything, not just us, will crumble. And I live in a messy, diverse world. I'm a messy, diverse person. I'm a Latinx queer woman who grew up in Mexico. I live in New York. I'm married to a Jewish trans man, and there's a lot of room in there to be imperfect, and there's a lot of room in there to be hyper aware of how, if we are imperfect in one way, it will become not just Stan was a terrible person because of this. It's Mexicans are terrible people because of this, right?
Yeah, I mean that's what they do. That's what happens, and
that's what happens.
Yeah, it's a one of the many results of how segregated our world is, exacerbates all of these issues. Absolutely.
I definitely think it that absolutely bleeds into publishing, because there are, publishing has a tendency to just kind of be like, okay, this is the person representing this group. We don't need to hire anybody else. They've got it. And it's like, no, we don't need, that's not how any of this works. This person has such a specific intersection of identities and the way that it went. They can only really speak for kind of their experience of culture. And we cannot put this pressure on marginalized creators to speak for everyone, because they can't and they shouldn't. What there should be a wide range of everyone from every group who is able to kind of talk about their experiences, because there is always someone who will connect to it. I mean, that's what intersectionality really is about. It's not about having like a figurehead for every group.
Exactly.
That's that causes a problem for everyone. It causes a problem for new creators who feel like they have to like take that spot, and it causes antagonism, and it causes people who are in that spot to feel very tokenized and feel kind of like you're not, people treat you like, well, you are this representative, so that's why you're getting these jobs, and it's, it makes you feel like you are not doing it off your own value. People treat you that way, you internalize it. It's, I think that speaks to something probably all of us here understand, not just in our personal lives, but also just kind of managing publishing generally.
Let me take that one step further. Actually, oh, sorry, Amanda, is it all right?
Yeah, please go ahead. I want to hear it.
To take that one step further, in our work, the whole, I used to always hate, I don't know why this was my fixation as a kid, right? But I would always keep count of Disney princesses and how many blondes they were, and how sometimes you would get one Pocahontas, but you would not get two Pocahontas, or you would get one Mulan. You would not get two Mulans. And for every time someone different came out, it felt like they would add another white princess. And that was, I don't know why that was something I fixated on, but I like kept the ratio count and kept thinking there's always like 4 blondes to like one of any other kind of, I think in my head I was like coloration, or like a color palette almost, right?
Yeah, I mean that's how Disney sort of treats it. They treat it like flavors.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so to carry off what Nadia was talking about, to hell with the idea that we only get one. And I like wrote an angry article about this that's coming out later, but
yes, it's going to be on WeNeedDiverseBooks.com's website. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Amanda. The idea that you can only have one person in your writing representing an entire group, otherwise, no, that's too much. And it's like, no, that's not how we are in real life. I have a varied friends group, but I have a good amount of other Latina friends, and I don't know if I have any straight friends at this point, but I feel like I have like a person I think is my straight friend, and then later on, like last time I remember we were like at tea, and they were like, it's always nice to talk to another bisexual person. I was like, oh, I didn't know that about you, but okay.
You're like, this explains why we're still friends. It's great.
Yeah. Granted, I say, like, in my head, I'm like, a year ago, but no, this was like 2 years ago.
I know.
yeah,
last year feels like, it's kind of like when the snap happened in Avengers. We're just like, okay, this was a time.
Yep. And so the point is, we can fill our work with as many people of like our marginalized identities as we want.
Exactly.
Why not?
Yeah. And that leads right into our next question, which, and now we have a cover of Hazards of Love next to our last question.
Oh, nice.
So what do you think diversity means to publishing houses? We've already kind of started talking about that a little bit, but how do you think the word and the idea of diversity has been commodified by publishers? Because I feel like the word's being thrown around a lot, but as we've seen in a lot of articles, especially in the New York Times, that all of those changes that publishers promised that they would do in 2020, none of them have happened and no personnel changes have occurred. So what do y'all think?
I have a question to ask the newly published.
I was like, I've been holding in a tweet for a year that was like, hey, everybody who's been contacted by publishers in the summer of 2020 for specific projects, how many of you have been ghosted? Raise your hands.
Oh my God, so many hands would go up. It is not good. And it comes down to just in many ways, the way in which the like sort of ruling class and upper middle class white folks sort of see Black and brown labor as disposable ultimately. And even if they're working with the creator who they love, I mean, they're thinking about it in terms of what this is going to do for them, for their career, for book sales, for what have you, to be able to say, look, we did this the next time someone yells at them for being racist. And so much of it has nothing to do with the actual creators. And I think that's why it's so easy for publishers to sort of see creators like this as disposable. And I love these visibility campaigns, but I feel like in some ways they're a double-edged sword, because people are just sort of collecting names and emails, and I'm not sure if they're putting in the same amount of consideration and thought when they reach out to a creator of color that they are when they reach out to some white comics name.
I think there's a lot of fear associated with it as well, of not wanting to do it in quotes wrong. The backlash that will come from some is certainly in the world of comics, certain communities that don't want to see their world change, or aren't really high on the idea of diversity and what they think it means. And I think to what you were saying just a moment ago, targeting towards book sales, like, how can we make money off of this idea?
Yeah, exactly.
That's
I think
the crux of it.
Yeah, the crux of it. Would we be here if it didn't turn out that, if you make books for an audience that no one's making books for, they'll buy the books. Right. It's like, this is some basic shit here, right? But because the mental block is so strong, that the insecurity is heightened, like you're saying, Rodney. There are a lot of people in all white leadership teams and editorial teams who are just hand-wringing the whole time, and they can't make a decision, and they don't know who to trust, and they don't know how to trust a person of color in the right way. And so they kind of do it the most easy way they can think of, like, bringing in like someone long in the tooth, or or someone who like already has a name in a different industry or something. And it's like, we don't need Old Dirty Bastard to sell a comic. We don't need Jay-Z to sell a comic. We are making stories that are based on real things that people want to read about. But yeah, there are just a lot of baffling decisions that all white leadership teams are making. And I think you're right. It's because of a lot of insecurity and fear.
I think the
Yes.
thing that I would be most excited about is when they start hiring, um, you know, non-white people to write white characters, mainstream white characters. Like that's going to be like that's where we need to go,
Exactly.
and what you can't just keep like this kind of weird publishing segregation that goes on
Yeah.
where either it's you have to write a character who's exactly like you, or you have to write like kind of a middle grader YA like diversity 101 book,
Yeah.
which is, I think we need to see, diverse creators tackling Batman, Spider-Man, like, just kind of the big
Well,
guys.
Yeah.
it's funny because I'm doing it at the moment and I'm absolutely terrified. It's the first project I've had that have had no Black people in it. It's got no like subject matter, no under the white nationalists or something, that this guy is going in to do that has to do nothing to do with my culture whatsoever. And it's the first project I've ever had that was like that. And I guess Lando, the Star Wars stuff, but he was Black. So that made sense that I was Black. But this other thing is like, it's odd because it's the first, I never thought anyone would ever offer me anything like that, ever.
Great.
I'm glad that
That'd
it
be great.
happened.
Yeah, same.
Me too. I hope I do it well, but yes.
Yes, I hope more comes of it. But that's exactly what we need. When the perspective shifts is when we start to see things differently, and when we start to actually learn some things about other people and ourselves and our own assumptions. And that's exactly what we need when things are not written to the white gaze, which I know is terrifying for white readers. They want to be coddled, they want to be handheld, they want to be told what's what. They want people to tell them the jargon and the slang, and it's like you don't need to infiltrate Fed style in order to identify or relate to somebody. But
Yeah.
that's kind of the only way they know how to see it. And yeah, it's a
Yeah.
bummer. How do you feel,
Yeah,
Nadia?
it's very much like a term I always feel a little bit weird about is when people say humanization. Like, why do I have to prove?
You see, we already have this set on dehuman. How will
Yeah.
you humanize this?
Yeah, I kind of that's and kind of the other thing that I get. I mean, yeah, if this is going to be like the messy panel, if you are going to, like put forward a project by a diverse team that's like, hey, like we're going to show, that this is like diversity and we're going to plaster it and we're going to use the image. Why don't you pay us as well as you pay
What an
our
idea.
peers? Like we know that you're going to be getting a lot of clout, and so like why? But at the same time, because of that kind of, there can be only one ism thing. You feel the need to take that job because like where, you know what I mean? Like you take the deal because you're starting out and shit, wherever you can get in. And the other thing I want to see publishing is diversity is not just for, kind of like slice of life. Like I would love to see some, just allowing us to get very surreal and weird.
Yes.
Yes, baby, like hazards of love.
Yeah.
Sorry, you're speaking my language. One of my favorite upcoming writers, Zinni, I say upcoming, she's been writing for a while. Zinni Rockland has publishes a shirt that says, support weird Black girls who write weird. And I just love that.
Yes, feel that very hard.
Right. That's the thing. We get, I worry that publishers want us only to write, our experience, as opposed to here's a 30 book fantasy series that has, characters like me. And the question becomes, okay, but how have you worked in a subplot about, their struggles with racism and that sort of thing. And it's like, I have worked in a few sword battles and some dragons because that's what I wanted to write. Especially with like young middle schoolers and stuff like that who are writing. I worry that we discourage them from using their imaginations.
Oh yeah.
By focusing on, no, you can only write about, it's not even like, there's such a voyeuristic, write about your trauma instead of, write about the good things or that sort of thing.
It's almost
and it's all very shallow.
It's almost as if publishing feels that your trauma is what validates your work, and rather than your skill as a person or your vision, and that's also just really harmful. I think just something that some of our peers might not understand is just how many little ways, how many like little trip ups go that slow you down and burn you out so much quicker. But I feel like I'm complaining a lot this panel, but I've been really
These are real feelings.
I've been really lucky to be supported to write kind of the stuff that I want to write. But I certainly have been thinking about and have felt a lot of this pressure as I move forward in my career. So
this is important, and you are in an important place in your career, all three of you in different ways. And I think this is really instructional and useful, especially for any white folks watching this panel, especially those who have sometimes suspected that it's really easy to get plucked up and get a book deal just because of who you are. And I would like to challenge those assumptions with these stories that we're hearing today of, for every win, how many L's did you take? And the answer is way more than the average white creator. It just is.
I definitely the last New York Comic-Con that there was, I had a panel with Sarah and G. Willow and Erica Henderson about Orientalism in comics, and we talked quite a bit about the fear of self-orientalizing. We are Americans, so we have grown up with these images of our own cultures reflected back at us. It's very easy to internalize that and put that back into your own work. But what I'm not going to ever forget is we had a very young teenage girl who came up and asked the panel a question where she said that sometimes she wonders if she is writing stories about her, her race and her experience because she wants to, or because that's what publishing wants from her. And how can you tell the difference? And my answer is you can't. Sometimes,
Sometimes it's a little vague. It's a little bit of a Venn diagram sometimes.
It's that Karen. She's back.
Yeah, that Karen in our heads, and it's because that Karen has been our teachers. I didn't have a black teacher until college. And we're shown only misery, and white folks have only seen media about people of color when it's about something important that you should really think about. Wow, that was powerful. Those kinds of things where they've seen so much trauma that they think that's all it can be. And they also have, because we live in racial capitalism, it's also been borne out that the trauma is what sells. And so white audiences have been trained to consume our trauma for 150 years. So how is, we're working up a real steep hill when we're trying to get folks to see our actual lives, because they've never seen them. They don't live in our neighborhoods. They,
That's sort of kind of, when I was growing up, again, I'm aging myself, but sitcoms, the good times, Jefferson's, whatever, there was a certain math of where conservative whites were bad, liberal whites were good, and black people were like martyrs hanging in the balance, looking for someone to come along and be the good liberal folk that were going to come along and save us or deliver us. And that sort of bled over into films. I don't know which one came first, but there was always sort of a savior. It was sort of letting white folks off the hook to a lesser degree of there's a good one that's going to help this bad, the Klansman. That's one form. That's not everybody. And it was this hopeful thing. And, you know, after a while of seeing that so much, that math of storytelling, you start to believe it must be true, you know, and this is how it is for everyone.
Yeah, and that must be me also.
Yes.
You know, they're looking at the white liberal savior character as, oh, that's
and I want to,
like
that's
me.
the ally. Yeah, that's the ally.
Yeah.
And to what Nadia was saying a moment ago, you know, when you begin to identify a group of people by their trauma, you know, or that's who you are. So every story that you come in and you try to pitch or tell, it's got to have that thing, that degree of familiarity that's in it.
And they're judging your pitch against the bullshit they've seen.
Yeah,
right?
or that they believe, or that they really believe to be true. Like that's sort of the starting point. And anything original you want to hang on, it's like a Charlie Brown Christmas tree, where, you know, the spine is kind of weak, but still this is what people know. So I'm going to, as long as we can pepper that in there, then we're guaranteed that people will know and recognize what it is. And it's unfortunate, but yeah.
Even when we're talking about our traumas, like there's like nuances to that. Like there are even times where it's like, if you're trying to talk about, you know, kind of a trauma or like some difficulty that you've experienced specifically because of your identity, they're like, no, I want this one because this one's familiar to me. It's like, you know, like, I don't know. Like I said, I'm type 1 diabetic, and it's like, I don't know. I want to talk about my pump scars. And they're like, no, who cares about your pump scars? Like we want to know about like your hospitals. Like I want to hear about your parents, because we want to hear about how you want to be normal. Like, you know what I mean? And it's like, because that's what we recognize, not, you know, like you being like, I don't know, I've been diabetic my whole life. I don't really give a shit. I just, you know, here's like my specific little things about navigating life. And it's like, no, we want the trauma that sells, not like the other one. You know,
and that's the thing. You can always tell when it's done cynically. Sorry, Amanda. I feel like
I was just gonna say it sucks.
Yeah. So we keep seeing a diversity done cynically, or at least I feel like when it's sometimes paid lip service by people who don't understand why there's a need for it in fiction, why we want stories that reflect us. And it's like when you were a kid and like the bullies had this one trick where they'd pretend to like you and the things you liked, and then a day later you found out that it was just to make fun of you or just because they were bored, right? And in that way, I feel like our experiences, our stories, which aren't necessarily like, I like I said, I write horror fantasy. I write horror sci-fi. That's happens to have characters who are like me. I'm scared that this is just kind of them, that at the end of the day, people who pick this up are just checking a list off, right? Of, I read a diverse book. Now I can go read the stuff I really like.
Sorry I keep jumping in, but I feel a lot of what everyone's saying, especially kind of like when I pick up a book and the review or the thing is like important, timely, you know what I mean? It's like that can feel infantilizing in and of itself.
Yeah. Well, it's like Pride has corporate sponsors every year this day. That's why there's like a queer liberation march in contrast to it. Because there's something about seeing a Bank of America gay pride float go by that makes you think, we're marketable now, right? And it, in one way, it's good that we're marketable, but also, what if there comes a time when we're not marketable? Are they still gonna show up? Right?
It's, you know, and there will be no ceremony or shame in when they dump you, you know, and that's it's this weird conditional support in an effort to make money off of you. And it's I remember once marching in the WeHo Pride Parade, and there was apparently a fight between NBC Universal and Sony over who is going to bring the most cis hetero white people to the march in a competition to see who is gooder. And that showed me everything I needed to know. That was like 12 years ago. But yeah, I agree with what all of you are saying. There is a cynicism, there's also the fear, and there's the lack of imagination, and sometimes just active harm. Something I'll speak to is how, if you're lucky, you'll get some people of color in editorial at a place, but you'll rarely see them in marketing, and that's a huge part of how these books reach their readers. And if marketers only know how to market books to white people, then that's going to inform what gets acquired. That's going to inform how things get edited. It's going to inform which book gets to be a tier 1 leading the list for the season, and which one is going to get mid-listed and buried because of the amount of work that they're putting in these books that they've valued higher, which happens at every place. And there are lots of reasons why it happens, but structurally, these institutions are not prepared to select or sell a lot of these books and stories. And it's something that, just as an editor, I keep an eye on, because I'm like, hey, I'm bringing in all these books. I'm bringing in friends and comrades and people who I believe in, and I don't want them to get dicked over, So yeah, messiness over, but yeah, it's a real concern. So I'm kind of curious, tying all of these threads together. What do you want to see more of in the future of publishing? Nadia and Stan, you've already kind of spoken to a little bit of it, Rodney as well, but how do you want to see things change? And hey, be as specific as you want.
I think for me, I wish there wasn't a stigma behind, like, when everybody's talking about the specificity of their lives, their experiences, whatever. I wish we could just tell the story without taking it into consideration, where it's going to go. That people, and I hate to say normalize, but to where everybody can just tell the story that they want to tell, and that publishers would get behind that idea, and that marketing wouldn't be so antiquated to the idea of where, we have to send this to this place, and we have to go here, because you never know what people are going through, and you never know how you can actually be educating someone who doesn't come from that particular experience, and they can read it and it could enlighten them. I grew up with a lot of really messed up ideas as to who people were, patriarchal, blah, every category that I grew up with was wrong, because I grew up with people who really just stayed in one lane as to how they thought, and they passed that on to me. And I was fortunate enough that I got around folks who checked me whenever I would kind of spread that thinking or do something or say something that wasn't, it wasn't just check me, they would educate me in a way. Right. And I think, we have an awesome responsibility in that we can tell stories that are purely and truly from our hearts, that when people read them, more empathy could sort of spread, so that we would understand everybody's experience and not just a singular idea of what an experience could be. And quietly, a generation of folks behind us could actually feel like they belong, or that they have a voice, or that their voices are important or necessary. They don't have to feel like they have to hide someplace because they may not fit the idea of what they see on TV, because that's one idea of how you live in the world. And there's a myriad of ways that people express being human beings. And so I just wish it wasn't, the categories weren't just categories, if that makes sense.
No, I agree with you. And the way you describe, folks listening to you and hearing your ideas and checking you and teaching you, like, that's an act of love. And storytelling is an act of love. And when folks ask questions, sort of trying to pick apart the story in sort of a bad faith way, it makes you think, okay, well, you don't quite have what it takes to see what's special about this story yet, but I can show it to you. And I think that's something internally at publishers that editorial is responsible for. I truly believe if we are bringing in things to an institution that we think are of value, we have to explain and cry out and celebrate every single thing about those books that we think is important and will be imparted to readers. It's something I care about a lot as an editor. I'm always thinking about who's going to read this and how they're going to feel, when I'm first looking at a proposal, and not what its marketing going to think. I try to, you got to remove the Karen from your head, and I want to see more of that in other publishers. I want to see more people in editorial sticking up for their creators. What about you, Nadia?
I totally agree with what Rodney has said. I think that there's, because of the kind of limitations on diverse creators, that it can make you feel like you have to speak for everyone. You have to do it absolutely perfect. But the truth is that, we all grew up with very difficult and messy and bad ideas. We internalize and reflect the culture in which we grew up with, especially, American culture, American racism, American patriarchalism is all part of that, and so that is something that we have to challenge in ourselves. And the truth is that no individual can be a figurehead for a community, and we need to stop pretending that that's the case. So I want to see publishers stop treating marginalized creators as if they are, not people.
Exactly. Load-bearing pillars in their marketing enterprise. I think immediately of someone like Angie Thomas, from The Hate You Give. It's like there are a lot of ways in which the industry can make someone that they, the new sort of golden goose, too visible in a way that opens them up for more abuse. And so we're seeing a lot of that right now too. And we gotta change that, and that's one way.
Yeah, no, I mean, similarly to what Rodney was saying, I grew up with a lot of bad and terrible ideas up until like my early 20s, that I've, luckily had, people who were able to challenge that in me, and I am still learning and growing. And we need to allow, like, not just white people can mess up and learn and change. Like, we need to allow diverse creators the same amount of empathy and growth and chances to tell whatever stories they want, to be weird, to grow. I think publishing is just it's infantilizing, it's dehumanizing, even when they are holding you up as the golden goose. It's bad.
Yes. In some ways, it's almost more violent because the second you do something that doesn't make them the same amount of money, all of a sudden it's like you're a problem.
It's such a pressure also. Like, if you're a new creator from like an underrepresented community, it's like you feel this, like, I gotta, like, this book has to hit or else, like, I'll never get this chance again. Yep. You know what I mean? That's also just.
Yes.
And neither will anyone else like me.
Yeah, exactly.
And also, like, I'm thinking of The Hazards of Love right now by Stan, and it's literally about, a non-binary Latinx teen who is trying to be a better person, and they've made a lot of mistakes in their childhood, and they're in their adolescence. It's the time to sort of make mistakes and learn. And a lot of interesting things happen in the book that I won't spoil, but that's a big theme. And to be a little meta, in both the stories and in the outside world where the authors are actually pitching these stories, being given the room to fail and to make mistakes and to do weird things.
My other two things are, one, again, I'm going to reiterate, pay diverse creators what they're worth. We know that whenever you mess up, you're going to put our book on a goddamn list and be like, well, You know what I mean? So just like we know, so it would be cool if you know, evened out that pay. And I think definitely we need more people of color in editorial and marketing. I think it can be very hard to hand over, you know, your you know, something very personal to you, or your vision or something, and you're not sure if the person who's literally editing your work is going to get it.
Yeah, it sucks. And there's also, in some places kind of a differential of like some of the places that have POC in editorial are sometimes the places that can't give as much of an advance as the all white place. And then you're a creator caught in the middle going, do I get the bag? Or do I get a more respectful process? And that's a shitty choice to have to make too.
Also, pay on time.
Pay on time, please.
Like, oh my
if
God.
we're net 30, let's actually be 30 days.
Especially since a lot of diverse creators don't come from places where we have perhaps the greatest financial cushion to lean back on when publishing is like 6 months is fine for your paycheck, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And that's another way that we keep people out. I mean, it's the same conversation that folks were having about internships. Some people can afford to lose money. Some people are comfortable enough that they can just do what they want, and they don't have to worry about feeding themselves, which is not always the case.
I feel like I'm being real spicy today. I'm sorry.
This is supposed to be a spicy panel.
This
and
was
y'all
a
brought the
spicy
heat.
panel. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I know this is an important thing, and there are just a lot of things that publishers could be doing better, and the media that covers publishing could do better. I agree with all of you.
So in Hazards, I have a character who, in her adulthood, has like a little breakdown because she's had a lot of pressure from trying to be always perfect. And I feel that's another thing that we can do a meta comparison on. There's so much pressure on creators of color. And it's not that we're asking for, I feel like people keep thinking that we want like carte blanche to make mistakes, right? And it's not that. We want the same empathy that is given to white creators. Yeah. Like it's that whole thing where adult white men in their late 20s will steal a car and it's boys being boys, but a brown teen does the same thing and they're a criminal that cannot be saved.
Yeah,
right?
They're tried as an adult. They're more likely to be called a flight risk, so they have to stay in jail even if they can pay the bail. Yeah, it's just these layers.
There's layers to it, and so dialing it back a bit from my extreme example there, with creators, our work gets criticized, it's not criticized, critiqued, examined from every angle, so much more than like, can I swear? I've been cussing anyway. So much more than like work by non-marginalized creators out there.
Yeah, they get an opportunity because they've made books before to just go, oh, this is their next book. Do we want it? Sure. Like I've seen conversations and acquisitions that have been like, this just sails through, and then another book will get scrutinized to hell. And it's like, wait a minute, we weren't asking about plot point things for this book. So why are we scrutinizing this book so much more? That stuff just happens and people aren't even aware of when they're doing it, and you have to point it out to them. And that's in itself a scary thing.
Yeah. And so something I've been thinking about this entire panel, and I'm curious if you all have thought this as well, Rodney, Nadia, and even Amanda, if you've had this Karen in your head. So I imagine a lot of us have had negative experiences where suddenly we had someone who was a white ally until we were too mean, until we were rude, until we said something that was somehow offensive to them. Like I will always remember like this one white lady who had like called something the Klan with it, but spelled it with a K, and I was like, "Oh, can you not? This is like supposed to be a fun time thing, and let's this this is like, can you just change that? Maybe
Right, can we
back to
just
a
not?
C?" And it became this whole thing about, you think I'm racist, and I'm honestly offended. I have done so much work, et cetera, and it's like this blow up
Bring it back
when
to
you
me, baby. I can't acknowledge the harm I've caused, but I can make sure everyone makes me comfortable and coddle me until they'll stop crying.
And that's the thing. As we're making this panel, my question is, how many times have y'all paused, even just internally, even just for a second, and thought, did what I say just piss off someone who's watching this?
This entire panel. I've been called angry
Yes.
a lot, and I don't really consider myself an angry person whatsoever.
No, Nadia, you're so sweet.
You, no, I mean, you can guess who calls me angry.
Mhm.
It's funny because I'm adapting a book for a TV show called Things That Make White People Uncomfortable.
Excellent.
And the pilot episode, it's an anthology series, it's for HBO Max, is called Birth of a Karen. And so I've had to go in and do all of this work on how do you make a Karen? You know, where does that idea come from? And everybody on our producing team has an idea of what a Karen is, where Karens come from, you know, how this thinking. And it's funny because every time I have to, you know, lend my thoughts, someone's offended, you know, by that idea. And are you calling me a Karen? Because I think the way that, you know, this, and, you know, it's sad. I think that,
The inability to see themselves. There's just the lack of
yeah,
introspection.
the level
They're
of
afraid to look
self-awareness.
inside. Mhm.
Yeah, it's you know, we grow up in elementary school, like beyond our personal, you know, our personal lives, how we grew up with our families and all of that stuff. You know, we grew up learning that white men basically created everything. You know, that's with elementary school, junior high, high school. There's a foundation that's laid to automatically put you in a category that you're secondary. And so I think even when we're approaching, certainly when you're in the superhero world, you know, the super friends were white. Everybody was white.
Mhm.
So when you come in, they add Black Falcon, who I don't know who that was, but when I saw him pop up, or you see Franklin show up with the Peanuts, and this exception, it was always like sort of an exception. So I'm not surprised that later on in life, the people who saw these things or grew up in a particular way in American society are offended, you know, when you challenge that idea of what they grew up with and what they learned and founding principles that help them, you know, create some sense of identity. And I get it all the time. To answer the question specifically, I get it not so much in publishing because I've been fortunate, you know, most of the publishers that I've worked with, either I wrote a story, they gave me a couple of notes, and a book showed up. I didn't even really communicate that much with an artist.
Bless.
With the indie market, it's mostly, you know, I've been able to do what I wanted to do, and no one's really messed with me. It's mostly been in television and film, where I've experienced a lot of, you know, what you guys are talking about right now with offending people, because I'll come in with my idea of what I think racism is or problem is or whatever. And people who I think, because if we're not talking about race, we get along just fine. You know, everything's cool. But as soon as we talk about something that, you know, sort of pokes that idea of their understanding. I remember I was on one show and I had really cool writer who happened to be white. And she would say, I was probably for 3 weeks, you know, I had the Black characters on that show. They were my territory. And she said, I have to say something. The way you talk about Black people is nothing like my friends. It's nothing like the people that I know. And she said it with judgment in the tone of, I don't like the way that you're doing this thing. And I said, well, you know, where do your where do your friends come from? And most of them had gone to college with her, and she went to a really prestigious college. And, you know, they were from a different class and they were from a different group. And I'm like, well, that's not who we're talking about right now. She was looking at Blackness as this monolithic idea of what the group was. So I'm talking about gang members in, you know, the worst parts of the world. And she was talking about people who were here, and it set up for a great conversation. And we had a lot of great conversations afterwards. But it's just funny how the idea of America has sort of been disseminated to the masses as groups. If you're not part of that dominant idea that doesn't have nuance and specificity added to assigned to their group, it's just one idea of who you are. And if you try to deviate from that, it's typically where problems lay.
Yeah, that is so spot on. I've seen that happen a lot, and that is a fascinating conversation, because there are a lot of white people who think that their Black friend is like absolving them of all kinds of things that no one has ever
especially if it's a girlfriend or boyfriend or somebody I'm intimately close to, that person sort of represents everything. And so
yeah, and if you're going to Harvard and you're talking about the Black kids you knew at Harvard, we're on some talented 10th shit. Like you're out there hanging out with W.E.B. Du Bois. I'm talking about, you know, my friends and cousins back in the
desperation that are on the streets fighting for some degree of survival.
Exactly.
It's a different mindset from someone who has hope and someone who's in a position to improve the quality of their lives versus someone who has no hope and, you know, is struggling, hoping they live until the end of the day.
Exactly.
It's a different thing.
It's totally different. The folks who are truly living under the thumb of white oppression are different from the ones who manage to infiltrate white spaces for a lot of reasons. One of which is just the amount of shit you have to take to enter. I mean, it's a game of respectability. And, you know, you're comparing someone who has been extremely groomed to have to deal with white women like that coworker. Of course, she's going to be like, oh, this is totally different. And like, it sucks because like she's robbing herself of the opportunity to get to know a culture.
She's cool. I mean, she came around and we had, again, she was open to having the conversations and we had them throughout the rest of the season, and she's mad cool and I hope I get to work with her again. So
That's
it
great.
wasn't like a horror story to where, you know, it turned out badly. And fortunately, you know, I've met a lot of really great creative people who, like me, came from places where you think you know and you don't know, and someone from another place explains to you or gives you that knowledge, you know, and which is a gift. So yeah.
Absolutely. You guys have been amazing. Thank you again for this conversation. I feel like we've done a ton of excavating, and I feel like I feel a little bit lighter. I don't know about you guys. Thank you again for this. I'd love for you each to kind of go around and talk about where people can find you and what you're working on now, where they can get it.
Well, you just did it for me. I see following me at the Rodney Barnes on Instagram and Twitter. Working on Quincredible. I'm writing the third arc right now of Quincredible, but I think the second one will be on sale in July, and the first one has been re-released and is on sale now. I also write a book, Killadelphia, for Image Comics as well. I'm doing Cloak and Dagger for Marvel that's connected to the King in Black story. And I have my own publishing line and 3 horror stories that are coming out at the end of the year, led by Blackula, the Blackula from MGM Studios, and a few other things, but those are the headlines.
You're never not working. I love it. You have so much great stuff.
I got kids. These kids keep wanting to eat. I don't know what it is. They keep coming back with hunger.
How about you, Stan?
You can find me on Twitter at snakewife, as it says there. You can also go to snakewife.com, which is my hub site. I am working on The Hazards of Love, which comes out this March on the 30th, I believe.
Yes,
And
yes, from Oni Press.
very excited about that. It's collecting the web comic, which is on thehazardsoflove.com for the first time in color. And currently working on getting part 2 out for that.
Indeed.
Hopefully, cross your fingers by next year. And that's pretty much what I'm doing.
Good
A little
thing.
lazy.
Oh
little
yeah,
lazy.
multiple ongoing webcomics. Yeah, very lazy. How about you, Nadia?
So you can find me on Twitter at Nadia_Shamas_. And it's just Nadia Shamas on Instagram. My website is also nadiashamas.com, so you can find my work and what I'm doing as long as I remember to update it there. Right now, like I said, Squire comes out in 2022. I am also the writer for the upcoming Ms. Marvel graphic novel for Scholastic and Marvel's collaboration, and that's coming out later this year. So you can find that soon. The artist will be announced soon. I'm very, very excited about that. I'm also writing the She-Hulk short for the upcoming Women of Marvel issue, and that will be here in April, I think. So,
Nice.
soon. And a bunch of other stuff that's going to be announced in March.
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm really excited for all three of you. You have so much stuff going on. A lot of bangers are coming out this year from all three. So yes, thank you again, WonderCon Virtual Styles 2021 for having us and all of our messy honesty. I hope it penetrates for those who are watching. And thank you. Yes.
I do want a disclaimer before we log off to anyone who I'm working with who's watching. No, I've been very fortunate. You're all lovely. I love you. I'm not talking about you. I promise.
If the four of us are working with you, it means you're chill.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There you go.
At least for now.
Like, quite frankly, I'm like, oh, Nadia is angry. I like that. Yes, let's be friends.
Like,
well, I mean, you said horror, and I was like, let's talk.
Oh, I like, some collabs are cooking up. I love this. Yeah. Oh man. Thank you again for being here. This was such a great talk. And I hope to talk to all of you again soon for another panel, not about diversity.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for
Thank you, Amanda.
Yeah.
Take it easy.